I'm Primal Piggy. Thank you for joining us for a new uh, BDSM United podcast, another one in our slave training series. Slave training means to adjust the slave's core attitudes and behaviors to be more in tune with the master's attitude and way of living. Today, let's talk about discipline training because discipline training is used to teach proper behavior and obedience. Discipline is described as instruction and exercise, training, whether physical, mental, or moral. Generally, the time spent training your slave to kneel, to stand, speak, and so on is defined as disciplined slave training. It's also training to adjust attitude. One of the uses is to teach and practice proper behavior. Punishment is correcting a slave's bad behavior. It's a penalty imposed on the slave for a wrongdoing. It's used after the slave has displayed bad behavior, such as demonstrating to the slave uh, that it has displeased its master, to show that the behavior was unacceptable and its actions have consequences, and to provide reinforcement for a change to proper behavior. A slave punishment focuses on bad behavior, whether it's intentional or not, because behavior modification is a significant part of slave training. It's also behavior modification is also a significant part of an MS relationship dynamic. Punishment can be administered to the slave even if its bad behavior is unintentional. However, the method and severity of punishment depends on the bad behavior and if it was intentional or unintentional. In other words, the punishment must fit the crime. A punishment of a slave aims to improve the slave's behavior or remove completely the bad behavior or the unwanted behavior. The slave may not like the consequences that the master implies, but it accepts them because they apply to it and they're for its betterment. Punishment, however, is not role play. We're not talking about things like punishments or any of this other new made up kinds of things. We're talking about actual discipline and punishments that have to do with a relationship dynamic. Uh, Punishment is to correct a real problem using real punishment. A slave must agree to accept punishment during training and grant the slave's trainer the authority to punish. If it's not, then it's abuse. Slave gives informed consent to punishment for the purpose of helping to correct its behavior. It will not work in the long run if it's not agreed to by both parties. The objective of punishment is not really to cause physical harm or to be a way of taking out anger against the slave. Punishment is meant to correct the behavior, and I think a lot of times when we approach a potential slave or slave in training with that attitude and with that understanding, it's easy to grasp to get their consent because they really do want to serve, to obey, and to please the master. And so, when they realize that you're not wanting to punish them based out of anger, but you want to just correct or you reinforce the desired behaviors, the things that will really help them to serve, to please, and to please you, then it is definitely something that they will desire. Slave punishment for bad behavior doesn't always involve corporal punishment. That is things like impact. Punishment is anything administered by the master that's very uncomfortable to the slave for the purpose of changing behavior. It could be having the slave to stand in the closet, to go to bed early. It could be a restriction of privileges. It could be ignoring her, caging, bondage, refusing to allow it to serve you for a period of time. Punishment can take many other forms as well. A slave should not be allowed to misbehave to fulfill their masochist needs, and they should never be rewarded for bad behavior. Don't let what you intend to be a punishment be a reinforcement for bad behavior. Being placed behind the couch in the living room for an afternoon can teach a slave a valuable lesson, for instance. Um, the use of physical bondage, oftentimes as well, isn't necessary. Um, Often, if a slave makes a noise or disrupts you in any way, um, a punishment can be extended. Um, Oftentimes, mental bondage, sorry, I got to kind of ahead of myself there in my notes. The use of physical bondage is not necessary. Using mental bondage by instructing it to remain quiet, still, and out of sight is generally works well. In general, the more the slave loves pain, the less it should be routinely applied as punishment, and the more care it takes in administering pain as punishment. Um, Oftentimes, the slave should have full knowledge of what behavior is expected of it so it can properly serve. What is expected of it should be constant and clearly defined by the master. We often like to say that consistency is one of the most important things in in any power exchange or authority exchange relationship dynamic. So you definitely want to be consistent as consistently as you can. This is why things like written rules, description of the positions, and protocols are really necessary. The importance of discipline training and communication can't be understated in the overall training process. Definitely anything you can do to reinforce the consistent identity that you have as master and the consistent identity that they have as slave is going to be important to the overall discipline of and the health of the relationship dynamic. Now, coercive power is one of the five forms of interpersonal power that a master has over its slaves, over their slaves. Sorry, coercive power or authority is imposing by the master's will rules and expected behavior upon his slaves by the use of punishment or simply the threat of its existence. Coercive power, though important, is not always the best and most effective form of power that a master has over his slave. A corporal punishment is defined as a deliberate uh, inflection of pain used in the correction of an adult slave's misbehavior. The slave agrees as part of the correction process and healing process that it will accept its punishment. So corporal punishment really kind of has two categories, just so you know: immediate and formal. Immediate punishment is usually less intense and of a much shorter direction than formal punishment. Its purpose is to immediately correct the slave for an infraction that is caused by a lack of attention to detail during the training, or to reinforce changes in like automatic responses or habits, like failure to maintain the eyes down, as stated in your rules. So, an immediate punishment is like taking a riding crop, and while you're if they get slack in a certain position, just an immediate little pop to the like the bottoms of the feet or the part of the body that uh, is out of line with what the slave position is supposed to be. That's like an immediate punishment or uh, immediate punishment. Now, uh, the worst punishment often that somebody can receive is the knowledge that their master is displeased with their actions. In other words, that worse than any corporate punishment that a master can administer to a slave is that they feel that they have disappointed you. That disappointment is more intense and more of a motivating factor than any kind of punishment that you can actually dole out. So, a good slave or a submissive will oftentimes feel sorrowful for displeasing or disappointing the master, and this will provide motivation to correct behavior. But sorrow isn't always enough to foster future correct behavior. So oftentimes we accompany that displeasure or that disappointment with some other type of punishment as well, in order to drive the point home and to really foster correct future behavior as well. um, this is especially true when training a slave to change normal daily behaviors, such as their the types of habits and routines that they had as a submissive when they were autonomous. We want to change them to be dependent on the master and to take over the master's attitudes and way of living. Just telling a slave that it's made a mistake is not enough to ensure the change when the focus is on changing habits and routines. So, punishment, or a more formal punishment, provides motivation to change. Immediate slave punishment is useful where a change in habits and routine behavior is required. Like two examples are when a slave does not say "sir" each time when addressing the masters, or when maintaining eyes down in the master's presence. These are habits that you may want to adopt. And immediate punishment is effective when the slave slips during the training. A behaviorist calls this stimuli response type training, or calls this, sorry, stimuli response type training, instead of making an attempt to change cognitive thinking. So this is like changes their stimuli response. Now, this is easier said than done. Some actions that the master wants may require discipline training and may require time to correct. Most habits and routines require not only knowledge, but a lot of practice before they're successfully changed. Oftentimes, your submissive that is becoming a slave has a lot of years of experience practicing their certain rituals, routines, and habits, and changing them and forming them into the slave to serve you. Will take a lot of practice and often take an amount of time to correct and to change. If you're going to live in a 24/7 master slave relationship, many new behaviors really have to be ingrained into the slave. They have to become part of the slave's regular daily routine. And this is achieved by providing the slave with the knowledge of what you expect, setting goals, applying discipline and punishment, providing positive reinforcement for correct behavior and encouragement. And punishment is only one tool used in the BDSM lifestyle for slave training. We'll talk a little bit more about the formal side of training, slave punishment. Sorry, in our next podcast. This was really talking about that immediate one and about just kind of unfolding the idea of why punishment is necessary, and why just disappointment probably isn't going to be strong enough of a motivating factor to foster future correct behavior. And so we just wanted to kind of lay that out here for you. I'm Primal Piggy. Thank you for listening to today's slave training podcast. We try to give you a lot of meat, a lot of substance, but we don't want you to choke on it. So we try to give it to you in small portions. So that's why we're not trying to overwhelm you with hours long podcast episodes. And so we're breaking it up. You can find all of our resources online at www.bdsmunited.com. We're really trying to boost our FetLife presence. So if you find the link to our FetLife on bdsmunited.com, send us a follow or a friend request on FetLife. FetLife is a useful tool for finding local events, and it's also a place where more education needs to take place. There's a lot of during the pandemic, a lot of things shifted on FetLife and with the fetish community, and so a lot of things have changed on the site, just attitudes and whatnot. And it's definitely a good ground for us to provide more BDSM educational material. And so, by connecting us with us there, you'll get notifications about the podcast, but you'll also just kind of help others find these BDSM educational resources. When you like and follow, it helps spread this type of awareness or this type of BDSM education. So, thank you for playing your part in that. And it's been a joy talking with you today, and I'll talk with you again soon.